Alrighty, I'm going to get on the computer today. We only have 20 minutes, so it's not enough time to really walk you through a lot of steps. But I decided I would open up a bunch of my PSD files of artwork that I really love and kind of show you guys how it was done. So I hope you enjoy it. Alrighty. It's a little bit shiny up here. So my world, my passion is digital photography and composite artwork. It's my absolute favorite. I come from an illustration background, and it's my way to be able to create my worlds using Adobe Photoshop. So one of the things that I look at every single image is I look at it and I see, what can this story tell me? What does this image want to be? That might sound a little bit weird, but I find that if you just relax and start looking at the image, it'll start talking to you, and you can feel what feels good when you're working on the artwork. So in this case, with this image here, this is where it started. One of my favorite things to do is I find interesting subject matter, interesting subjects, and interesting styling, and I start building it together in post-production. So some of these are simple, and I'm going to start with simple ones, and we'll get more complicated as we go. In this case here, this is a simple one light setup. It's not very complicated. It's nice and simple. A lot of people can do this. One softbox, high over top, brought down, and we had a little bit of reflector on her back just to fill it in a tiny little bit. And I look at this image and I go, well, what does this image want to be? What feels like doesn't feel right now? So first thing I noticed is right here, you can see that little bit of shadow, and I wanted it to be a little bit brighter, because I want to remove the distractions and start adding basically the visual entertainment of the image. Next thing I did is I started evening out the skin tones. Her skin is very pale, and normally I love that, but I wanted a little bit more skin tone just so that I can play with the colors later. And then this one is quite quick. I just started adding atmospheric elements. If you're using Adobe Stock, you can get a lot of these files and a lot of these pieces and start building them together in your artwork. So first thing I did was I added a little bit of smoke. I love smoke. It looks beautiful. And if you do it appropriately, people don't look at the image and go, oh my God, look at that smoke. They look at it and go, wow, what a great shot, what a beautiful environment. And that, I think, is the point and the purpose of really great artwork, no matter what you do, is you want people to notice the artwork that you've created and the message you're trying to send, as opposed to, wow, look at those effects. Next thing I added here was another layer of smoke. I just like to double stack it. I don't necessarily like the atmosphere being extremely identifiable. And then I started working with snow layers. I love snow. I think it's beautiful. I think it works nicely in images. And in this case here, we're just creating this environment, this feeling, this emotion. And then I added a little bit more. Like I said, for my world, this is quite simple. Then I started working with the colors. I added a little bit of green and highlights and a little bit of blue and the reds and the shadows. From here, I do use a plugin. I use a lot of plugins. I like them a lot. This one is called Nik Software. You can get it for free on Google. And it just plugs right into your Photoshop. So it's a very powerful tool. It does everything Photoshop can do. It just does it faster. So in this case here, I did what's called a detail extraction and a cross balance. From here, just another filter of a little bit of color. Another filter for a little bit of color. I spend a lot of time on color. And a lot of people ask me, like, well, how do you know when you're done? How do you know when you're finished working on an image? And I say, well, when it feels right. And that you'll get from the amount of hours that you put in. The more time you put in, the more you're going to know when your image is done. So if you're having a hard time figuring out when your artwork is finished, just keep doing it. And you know what? That pattern and your style is going to come out. Next thing I did is I also work a lot with color lookup tables. This is actually commonly used in film, but in Adobe Photoshop, it is. This little half circle down here, and it says color lookup. Comes stock with Photoshop. It has a bunch of color profiles. It's super fun. I love it. Next thing I did was I did a little bit of dodge and burning, because I wanted to bring more attention to the beautiful headdress. This designer had made this incredible piece, and I wanted to be able to bring out the details and the effort and the work that she had put into this piece of art. Because it's best if you can make artwork with great pieces of art. So if you can use wonderful pieces that other people have made that they are proud of, and then you get to take those ingredients and build them into something yourself, it's going to have an even higher impact. And then from here, it's very simple. It's just sharpening. I use a high-pass filter. I don't use high-pass filters on pure white backgrounds, because oftentimes the high-pass filter will gray your pure whites. So specular highlights, shiny cars, things like that, I tend to not want to use high-pass filter. But in this case here, we have white, but we don't have pure white, so it works. Next one we're going to go to here. This is one of my favorites. I photographed this in Montreal. The last image I photographed in Belgium. This one here, I contacted a LARPing group. They're basically, they run around, they have these incredible costumes. Same thing once again. Have great subjects, you can create great artwork. This is my baseline. My baseline is this incredible costuming, the face paint, and then my lighting. So I look at this and I go, what does this feel like to me? Right? This feels a little bit cinematic. I wish now, looking back at it, I've made this a couple years ago, I wish I'd cropped this in a 16:9, because it really would have had that cinematic feel, and I love that. I love artwork that's created with that crop. I think it's very, very, very attractive. First thing I did was I increased the contrast using curves. Next thing I started doing, I photographed a bunch of trees, and I started putting them into the image and making them darker and placing them around the subject. And I started working in my atmosphere, and I work on this very organically. I sit there and go, okay, well, what am I going to do? So I'm working with the composition here. I'm starting at his face, and I'm wrapping around. I'm going, okay, well, where do I want these trees? And that's usually a lot of moving around, a lot of fussing around. I added more trees, more trees, more trees. Lots of trees. And then I started adding more atmospheric elements. Once again, this is something that's very common and very prevalent in a lot of the work that I do, and we're going to see it a lot in the images that I've got for you today. Then I start adding a little bit of the atmosphere again. Once again, smoke. I love it. It's beautiful. And when it's applied correctly, it can add a lot to an image. Even images that are shot on location, you can add just very slight little pieces of atmospheric elements, and your artwork will look just a little bit better. And this guy here is something. You ever have those layers where you're like, it does something, but I'm not sure what? On my screen, it's a little hard to see. Oh, I know what that's for. It's for the texture on the axe. I spend a lot of my time working on my images zoomed in at 400%. So for me to be looking at it this size, it's a little weird. But I love adding in details. So in this case here, I added a little bit more realistic texture to the axe itself, because the axe was foam. Because these guys, when they play, they can't use real weapons because they're going to hurt each other. So it's foam. So I wanted to take away the fact that it's synthetic, and I wanted to make it look more realistic. Then I added in the sky for the background. I wanted to have a little bit of directional light going on, because that's how this looks, but still a nice, moody, dark sky. I think it looks very, very nice. It's one of my favorites. And then I started adding more atmosphere into the image again, adding layers and depth and pieces so that there's lots of things for the eyes to follow. I want stuff in the images to be noticed by your subconscious mind, not your conscious mind, until you really start looking about it and you really start thinking about it. Once again, more atmospheric elements. And once I have all my ingredients, so my first step of everything in most cases is get all the pieces together. Let's get all the elements of our foreground, our background, our midground, our atmosphere, everything before I start working on color. And then we start building up from there. So next step here is I started working in color. I desaturated it just a little bit. I do like to say I'm not colorblind, but I am color ignorant. My color theory is okay, it's not bad, but I'm not amazing. So for my handicap for that I do is I like to desaturate a little bit, so I'm like, oh, it'll blend better after. That's my workaround. Then I started doing selective color. It's very common for me to want to add a lot of blues into my shadows. That's part of my formula that I love. I think it's beautiful. I added a gradient map, which added a little bit of green, a little bit of yellow into it. Once again, color effects. I love this plugin. It works very quickly. In this case here, it's a detail extraction. Once again, just evening everything out. Hue saturation, I desaturated it again a little bit further. And then it's just very, very, very small, tiny adjustments from here. A little bit of tonal contrast to bring out more detail in his face. I didn't think there was quite enough there. I was losing a little bit, so I wanted to bring it back. Darkening the background, I'm forcing the eyes to go to the center of the image. I want them to start at the brightest, sharpest point in the image and then work their way around. I want looking at the artwork that I create to be an experience. In a world of digital where people spend 2 or 3 seconds looking at your image, and then they pass on to the next one, you want to get as many of those seconds as you possibly can. Selective color again, not enough blue. Some of my images, I will go like cool tones, warm tones, cool tones, warm tones, all the way through the PSD because I can't make up my mind. I know I'm not the only one. Hue saturation again, just a slight adjustment, and then I sharpened on his face. And that's about where we're sitting. All in all, this image was 7 hours. Because there's lots of deleted layers that I didn't show in here. I'm like, well, that didn't work, delete. Well, that didn't work, delete. My theory on artwork is keep pushing buttons till it sucks less. It's okay. We're all going to fail. We're all going to do stuff. Every single composite, for me, I fail my way to success. I try a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't work until I finally find something that does. We're on a fantasy theme today. We're going to roll through this guy, too. Some of these were my favorite to create. Actually, this one and the last one we shot in the same day. They're really fun. I think they have lots of stuff going on. And it's applying the same theory over and over again, but applied just a little bit differently. So in this case, the last image was very cool tone. This one's very warm tone. So my original looks like this. I have a great subject. He has a great costume. They love to act. He can emote. This is amazing. Emotions in your subjects are so important if you're seeing their face. They have to be able to sell it, whatever's going on. So finding people who love to dress up and cosplay like this, it makes shooting easy. And that means when you get to the digital art, your artwork can be even better going forward. First thing I did was I darkened the background. I want to bring him forward a little bit. And then a little bit further, because I decided, as I was compositing, that it wasn't dark enough. So I went back, and then I made the gray even darker. In this case here, remember how I said I zoom in to 400%? I was looking at the texture of the metal, and I was like, meh, I'm not really buying it, even though this armor is completely, it's metal. It's handmade, it's beautifully crafted. But I wanted a little bit more. I wanted it to look a little more beat up, so I started adding textures to the metal itself. Then I did a curves adjustment to that just to brighten it up just a tiny little bit so it looks believable. When people look at the final piece of the image, I don't want them to go, wow, I love that texture they added to the metal. That looks so good. No. I don't want them to notice it. I want them to go, wow, this is really cool. I wish I was in that picture, or I wish I made that picture. Then I start adding in my pieces. I start adding in more of my elements. So in this case, I have some mountain stock that I had photographed out of a helicopter over Montana. And I was like, well, this will work. I put it out of focus because I don't want it to be sharper than my subject. This is something I see in composite artwork all the time that is really weird. The background is sharper than the subject. Stop it. You can blur it just a tiny little bit. You want your subject to be the sharpest point in your image, unless, of course, they're an afterthought. You have an environment with a person in it, and the person is an afterthought. In this case, this is a person in an environment. So my person is going to be the brightest, sharpest point in my image. Next thing I'm doing, well, I'm adding clouds, because I like them. All my images have this kind of stuff. And then I added a warm tone to it. My mask, in this case, and this is going to look really funny, is very rough. It's very loose. It looks like that. Because I want there to be warm wrapping around his shoulders, but I don't necessarily want it overpowering his face. I don't want this to look like one grade of color. Smoke. I like it. It looks good. Then I started adding a lot of the debris in the air. I wanted this image to look very noxious, very toxic. I wanted people to kind of feel like he's having a hard time breathing. So I started adding a lot of stuff into the air and making this look like a bit of a struggle. Then I started adding trees. I actually think I used the same trees, just different parts of the tree. Rotate it, flip it, warp it a bit. You'd be surprised what you can do with the same piece of stock. Trees, trees, trees. And then I start adding a little bit of smoke. This is just brushes. Use brushes. Use as many brushes as you can. Get comfortable with them. Brushes are such a powerful tool that so many people are not utilizing in their artwork. It's amazing what you can do with them, and so quickly. More atmospheric elements. Dirt in this case. A little bit more smoke. A little bit more stuff kind of going on in the air. I've been caught in a dust storm, a sandstorm in Death Valley once, which completely killed my camera, but never mind. But it was like this. It's right before it hit, it was just like whoosh, and all this sand came curling up, and then we couldn't see anything. But I kind of wanted that little bit of feeling to go into it of like, okay, this is a little bit harder here. More trees down in the bottom corner there. More atmospheric elements. Just crunchy, lots of stuff going on. And then I was like, well, his face looks too clean. He's supposed to be suffering. Well, how do you make suffering? Well, let's hurt him a bit. So I started adding injuries. This guy's had a tough life. Then I started adding cracks to the skin. There's lots of different techniques for adding cracks and wounds to skin. This is just one of many. I took a piece of cracked earth. I put it over his face. And then I added an inner shadow, and I put it on satin as well. And so it was able to kind of then mask it in by hand and bring in those details. There's lots of different ways you can do it, more complex, more simple, but that's what worked for this image. Next one here, more stuff. I was like, it doesn't hurt enough. More brushes, more atmospheric stuff. And then I was like, well, he looks too human. Well, let's not make him human. Let's get rid of that. No more human stuff. Then we start working in dodge and burning, dodging some of it, burning some of it, brighter, darker, adding a 3D effect. And then desaturating a little bit. I like it. And then doing curves. I wanted to flatten it out. I wanted it to look a little bit more like a painting, so I just started playing with sliders. And like I said, push buttons till it sucks less. Push buttons till you think it looks good. Lots of the time I'm working on images, I'm just pushing sliders and going like, oh, well, this looks cool, this looks cool. I tend to avoid actions because I don't want to do the same thing over and over again unless I'm hired for a series. I love working on custom pieces and custom designs and custom patterns in my own brain. Selective color, more curves, another gradient map. And then I started pulling this into Nik Software here. And I started looking at this and I was like, well, his eye's glowing, but it's still not enough. I wanted people to really notice the eye. So I put a blue layer over top, and I just lightly painted with a brush to bring out that kind of surreal feel. And then I was like, nah, that's not enough. Let's do it some more. And then from there, sharpen. High pass again. I'm not working with any pure whites. I think it works. So we've got about 2 minutes left here. I'm going to walk through a really simple one. This one's really nice and quick. This one I was able to do in 20 minutes. Not all these composites have to take you 10 hours, 5 hours, 3 hours. Some of them can be very, very quick. So in this case here, I photographed this in my basement. I didn't even go to the studio for it. Set up a couple of lights. I fixed the top corner where the paper roll was because my ceiling's quite low in my basement. And I started adding elements. This is the same technique I was using in the other images, applied very quickly. I call it editing with a sledgehammer. My masking is really rough, but the point is the effect at the end. So adding texture, adding texture, adding texture, adding smoke. Making it black and white, and doing a curves adjustment because I want this to be really punchy. This is something that I want to look like a poster, right? I want this to be something that I can put up in my house, and I did actually. And then I did, once again, a Nik Software, a detail extraction. It pulls out a lot of that detail, making it look really, really crunchy. I like the effect. I think it looks awesome. A little bit of dodge and burning, a little bit of sharpening, and a little bit more of a curves adjustment. So this is essentially one of the ways that I love to work and I love to share, and I hope that something that I've been able to give you guys today has inspired you. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.